Once again, Mike Hall here in our BTN studios in Chicago. As the winningest head coach in Ohio State men's basketball history, Thad Matta is no longer the head coach. Joining us to talk about this now is our frequent contributor, Mike DeCourcy from the Sporting News. Mike, let me start with this. Will you listen to that press conference? Was this a retirement or a firing?
I think it was the most unusual hybrid of the two that I've come across, and probably necessarily so, because Thad's situation is different than just about any coach I've come across. Physically capable of doing the job, but not capable, I don't think, of doing it at the level that he had been accustomed to. Whereas maybe another coach might have a health issue come up, a heart thing or something, where you just got to stop and you don't really have much choice. I think Thad felt like he could continue. He's a competitor. I'm sure when they had that meeting on Friday, it wasn't, I think you should stop, and Thad said, oh, okay. I don't think that that's the way the process went at all. But I do think that Thad has an understanding that this had gotten really difficult for him, and that it had gotten less productive for Ohio State than was optimal.
Can you help people who haven't had a chance to follow him understand exactly how much pain Thad Matta was in on a daily basis?
I think that the people who understood the situation he was going through knew that it was really taxing. And you know, there's a lot of negative recruiting in basketball, as we all know, that any edge you think you can find, you go for it. And Thad's issues were very difficult to disguise by the end. And so I think that a lot of the competitive coaches who were searching for the same players he was said, without necessarily stretching the truth very much, that they didn't know how much Thad had left on his fastball. And I'm sure that became the ultimate decider for Gene Smith, that he just didn't know that Ohio State could continue to recruit elite Big Ten level players with that much pressure coming from the outside.
So this was more than anything negative recruiting hurting Ohio State, and that's why Gene Smith needed to make a decision.
I think that's a big factor, absolutely. There's no other reason it would have come today. I mean, if they had felt like they didn't have a future, it would have come at the conclusion of the last season, which didn't end in the NCAA tournament. They would have said, okay, this is clearly, you know, as great a coach as that is, it's not working any longer. Let's move on. I think they felt like they had a way forward, but what Gene Smith presented to us today was that as they've gone through the off-season recruiting, April's a very important month in recruiting, and as they were going through that, I think they saw that it was that they were losing battles, that they were losing ground in pursuing the next class or two of great high school talent, whether in Ohio or anywhere else, and that if they stayed in their current position, they were going to have a hard time getting back to where they want to be.
You mentioned that this was a weird hybrid between a firing and a retirement. In your relationship with Thad Matta, how long has he been considering stepping away?
You know, I had someone very close to me step away at an age very similar to where Thad is now. Step away not from coaching, but from another business in which he was very successful. And I mentioned that to Thad one day, very close toward the beginning of all this. It would have been around 2010, maybe. And you know, and Thad made a, you know, sort of a comment. Oh, he's my hero. And then when my friend went back to work after 2-3 years of inactivity, feeling like he didn't have enough going on, I think that was kind of a blow to Thad. He thought that maybe that, you know, that there was something out there for him beyond coaching that could fulfill him in retirement. I think that's Thad's biggest challenge now. He's still a young man, and what can he do that keeps him fulfilled every day? I think that'll be the biggest question for him as he looks forward to the rest of his life. He's got a lot of years left, and I do think, though, that he needs to get himself well, as he said during the press conference.
All right, yeah, only 49 years old, and we talked about that recruiting being used against him was one of the main reasons why Gene Smith chose to make a decision. But why was it not working on the court, Mike? I mean, if you look back at the last 5 years, here's how they finished in Big Ten play. Second place, then fifth, then sixth, then seventh, then 10th. This wasn't just one bad year, although this was his worst year, the one that just wrapped up. This was a downward trend the last 4 or 5 years.
Well, I do think that it was harder for him to put as much into recruiting as he had during the years when he was getting Evan Turner and Jared Sullinger and Aaron Kraft and the Conley Oden class and all those guys. It usually comes down to talent. I mean, it's not that he forgot how to coach. I don't think that was the question at all. It really came down to not having as good a collection of players as he had during, well, I guess we would call the glory years, going back to 2012 when they made the Final Four with Aaron and Jared in that group. I think that's once Aaron Kraft's class graduated, they had gotten to the point where there just weren't as many elite players in the program as there had been, and they were very fortunate with D'Angelo Russell. They were able to land him, and the fact they were also unfortunate with D'Angelo in that he blossomed so quickly. I think they felt like they were going to get 2 or 3 years out of him. When they recruited him, he was a top 25 guy. He was not top 5. He's going to the pros in 1 year, and he's going to be the second, third overall pick. It was he's going to be a driving force in our program for a couple of years, and instead he became a flash, a great star, an All-American as a freshman, and then he was gone. And I think that set back Thad as well. When you're not able to anticipate that you have a player who's going to be gone almost immediately, they very much knew that they were going to lose Greg Oden in a year. That was never a question. So they planned for his replacement. In this case, with D'Angelo, I don't think they were able to.
He's a 3-time Big Ten Coach of the Year. Only 2 Big Ten head coaches have more honors than that. Some guy named Knight and some guy named Katie. Mike, when you watched his really good teams, how good were his best teams?
Oh, he was terrific. I mean, let's not forget how close he came in 2007 to winning a national championship. First of all, it took Florida returning the 5 starters from a national championship team, which is, of course, very unusual in this era. Most of the time that at least half of those guys would then go on to the NBA. Greg Oden absolutely dominated the interior in that game, and unfortunately for the Buckeyes, they didn't defend the perimeter well enough and gave up too many threes and lost the game. But getting there with that group, with freshmen dominating the team, I think half of the top 6 guys were freshmen. They were kind of the forerunner of what you're seeing now with Kentucky and Duke. Being able to do that. And then the 2012 team, what a terrific team that was able to get to the Final Four through a really difficult Syracuse team in the Elite 8. I think Thad did a phenomenal job until he didn't have any wheels anymore. And at that point, it became hard for him to keep up with a Big Ten that's one of the problems of being a coach in the Big Ten is that you can't look around and say, "Well, I can beat that guy without even breaking a sweat." He'll take care of 2 wins for me, and that guy will take care of 2. You don't have that in the Big Ten. Yeah. So many good coaches, so many good programs. You have to be on top of your game the whole time, or you're going to be near the bottom of the league.
Final one for you, Mike. This is, to say the least, an unconventional time of year to be looking for a new head coach. What do you think this process will be like?
Well, I think the interesting thing that we'll see over the next couple of weeks or month or so, however long it takes, is whether or not they lose anybody they wanted because of the timing. It is hard. If you go back when Thad left, and he mentioned this, I remember I was on my way to Chicago for what was then pre-draft camp, the NBA pre-draft camp in 2004. And my phone rang, and it was Thad, and he was already very interested in the Ohio State job. And it was different then, though. He was a savior coach, and he didn't make $2+ million a year like maybe Chris Mack does in a good year. He was making his figure was his salary was still in the 6 figures. As opposed to now when that guy's definitely in 7. So if you decide that you want Chris Mack, does the timing say to Chris Mack, well, I've got a great gig and this is not right? I'm not sure whether or not that becomes an issue for Chris or for any other coach that you might call. 15 years ago or so, when Thad was the candidate, it was not going to be an issue because that coach was going to change his life so dramatically. Now, I think it's a little different. And so that's Gene Smith's number 2 challenge. Number 1 is identifying the right guy. That's always the most important thing in a coaching search, is getting the right person. But number 2 is if you pick the right person, will he be interested at this time of year? I think so, because Ohio State's a magnificent job, but there is that little bit of uncertainty about the timing.
Hall of Famer Mike DeCourcy lending his thoughts on the breaking news of the day. Thad Matta is out as the head coach at Ohio State. Mike, thanks for your insight. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike.